how unpatriotic do you have to be to call the police on somebody who's blasting? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah, no, it's great.
Like, those people over there acting free. Police, quick!
Yeah, I know. They'd turn us into the redcoats in no time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's good to know. That's another reason to do fireworks. It's good to know. Okay, that person would totally.
Yeah. That guy's a royalist over there.
Yeah, that's right. There's no freedom over there.
Right. Yeah, you need to just have copies of the Declaration of Independence and hand them out.
Well, how does that go? You end up saying, well, actually our state law doesn't allow us to. All of a sudden everybody becomes like, yo, we're states'
I don't
rights.
know. This is the whole business of, in just the definition of freedom is it's resting on something so much different in the two different situations. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just, there might not be as much distance as we think, and that's a problem. There should be a lot more distance. So, I mean, the whole, our whole, like we're just such a legalistic people in general.
What do you mean?
We're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, if we can't make it, it's no wonder. We should have known. We should have known when COVID hit that people would be calling the police on folks, telling on folks, because we've had many other examples of what that looked like with 4th of July, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you, if anything, wouldn't you just go to your neighbor and say, hey, man, y'all be careful because y'all got stuff coming over in my side of the yard and things are getting out of hand, you know? So just, hey, love what you're doing. Have a great time. Just be careful. Right? Yeah. I don't want you to buy me a new house.
And
I
think that there's not even, the question isn't even, the question of safety versus, should something that's not safe be illegal? We don't even know really how to answer that. And I think that's because we don't actually know the place of the government, right? Like the government, like that is your neighborly duty, right? To go talk to your neighbor. That's what neighbors do. That's not what police officers are for. I mean, that's not their job to keep everyone from ever doing anything that might hurt themselves, or, I mean, it's just but we don't even have a sense of neighborliness. Well, we were talking about this earlier, because we don't have that sense of self-government. We don't have we don't have even a category of self-government. Right? So even if you think about the kind of metaphor system that is fundamental to our cosmology in the modern world, right? When we talk about why are things the way they are, we talk about laws, the laws of nature, the laws of physics, the laws of biology, that sort of thing. Our whole cosmic imagination is that we've got a giant legal system that is pressing everything into its shape, and so we think that's what our legal system then is for. Why do you make a law? Well, because a law is going to press the society into the shape we want it to be in. It's a completely different understanding of law. And it's it's a fairly new metaphor system cosmologically. It's the cosmological metaphor system that we're using is not even very old.
Wait.
But
so are you saying, and I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying instead of the cosmos operating on us and how we should live in the world, we're operating on the cosmos and how we want it to bend to our will. Is that what you're ultimately saying? And that's what we do with laws. It's like, let's make a law and then let's make everybody bend to our new concept of the cosmos.
Yeah, well, that we think we are creating a society by laws, right? That we're shaping the society into the society via our legal system, because that's what we think laws do. Because we have developed a cosmological legalism metaphor system. Right? Like the legalism literally goes all the way down to the foundations of our imagination. I mean, because they didn't think that the stars moved because of the laws of physics in the ancient world. They thought the stars moved because that they loved God so much they couldn't help but dance. Right? That there was a that it was and that there was a that the motivation was not in response to a law, an impersonal law that was established that they couldn't help but. I mean, so we can't even talk about
the categories that you're trying to create is
the category. You can't, the category don't fit together. Right? The two understandings of the cosmos, a cosmos that's filled to the brim with life and desire and joy, right? Where trees clap their hands in response to God's glory, where the mountains rise up and judge us, right? Where reality is God's word alive, and so all of it is going to respond. All of it is going to respond to God, right? That's what creation has been doing since the beginning. God spoke it into existence, and it is returning God glory by the way it's acting, by the way it's responding to his continued storytelling, to his continued speaking. That understanding, that metaphor system is at odds with the modern metaphor system that we use for the way the world exists, right? We think the world is the shape it is because the laws are like a hole in the ground that form the puddle that water falls into, right? You think, why does a puddle take on the shape that it takes on? Well, because of the constricting nature of the edges of the puddle. We think that the laws of nature are the edges of the puddle that have created the world into the way it is. It's the way we talk. It's the thing we assume. And there's not a competing metaphor system right now because we don't even realize that it's a metaphor.
Okay. So, give me an example, like what's, I guess we were just talking about with fireworks. That's one, right?
Yeah. Well, we could back up even further.
Okay.
So the cosmological legalism, why do things fall? Because of gravity, right? What is gravity? It's the law of gravity. It just is. It's the fundamental force. It just is, and so things fall because of gravity. Right? So things take the shape they do because there is a fundamental law that holds it into that shape or presses it into that shape, right? And so, as conservatives, what we tend to do is say, I don't like the books that are in my kid's library. There ought to be a law, right? We should go fix that problem with a law, and we should get to the highest possible legal authority that we can, the most powerful legal authority that we can, to get that law passed. So if we can make it all the way to the Supreme Court, all the better. And we think we're actually rescuing society or solving something. But laws don't actually do that, right? So laws Paul says that the law inflames sin. So what is really going to happen, because we've got this false metaphor system, what we think, hey, I've just fixed something by passing this law. Well, what's actually going to happen is we're going to inflame the sin if we try to use the law to press new desires into the hearts of men. What actually happens is you inflame the desires that are already there, right? If you it's it's like diesel fuel. You don't actually even need a spark. You just need pressure to get the diesel fuel to explode. And then the explosion provides the energy that moves your car forward. But all you're doing is actually rapidly increasing the pressure, and then it explodes. What the law does to the sin within our hearts when we try to use it legalistically. And it's not because Paul isn't after our obedience that he explains that. He just says the law doesn't actually do that. But the law can inform our desires and tell us what obedience looks like, tell us what love looks like, give us that content. But the law itself can't actually change hearts, right?
Right.
That's a different sort of thing. But then we think, except for in the civic realm, there, I mean, no Christians would say that out loud,
right?
But
right.
because of the assumptions of our whole cosmological metaphor system, that's what actually makes sense to us. So that's what we do.
So maybe this is me being steeped in that kind of world still, but isn't there a place for the law that is restraining of sin? Because I think that there's a lot of evangelicals, especially when they get into politics, that are looking, okay, yeah, we need certain laws to help us restrain sin from maturing, growing, and overwhelming the culture. For let's just drag queen story hour. That should be illegal, right? Like that's just no. Or certain let's just go with the books, homosexual books inside the bookstores that are training your kids to do homosexual sex, right? Like that's I don't want that in the bookstore. So, but because there is no law, there's a restraint. There is no restraint of sin, and so you see sin just keep on going. And so what you say is, well, there has to be some point and stop where people who aren't Christians still have to fall in line,
be restrained. Yeah, restrained by the law,
right?
But how does the law do that? Right, the law does that through the swift just punishment. We think that the law does it up front, right? That the law does it on its
right
on its own. Yeah, and so
because and just to speak to that real quick is that I've seen people who are for having some sort of death penalty never want to enact it, right? They never want to enact the death penalty, but they want it, but they never want to enact it. Like people say, yes, people who still should be punished, but they don't know what the punishment is, right? So they do want laws there because they think it's on the front end that it restrains sin, when really it's on the back. That's a good point.
It's on the back.
It's on the back end,
and that's the legalism. Is we think that the law is the thing, the shaping. It's the justice is the thing that does the shaping.
Oh, that's good, man. Okay.
Yeah.
But people are thinking, oh, our justice is so backwards because people think the law is the justice.
Right. So here's a good example. My grandfather was, he was an accountant that, he was the president of the National Association of Certified Public Accountants. And Reagan brought him in to rewrite the accounting law because it was in shambles, right? And so he came in and organized the accounting law. He was an elder in his Lutheran church, and so he had a very deep sense of the Christian understanding of justice and theft and all that. And so he and this group put together an organized version of accounting law at the federal level. And when there was back in the early 2000s, there was a major, like a high level scandal where Enron was caught with its hands in the cookie jar.
Yeah.
And the I believe it was Nancy Pelosi held up it was called the Anderson Code. It was named after my grandpa. Held it up and said, "This law is not working. We need a law that can't be broken like this." Right? Actually, the law was working exactly the way it should have. Enron got caught. They were going to jail, right? That's what, and then everybody should look at it and say, "Oh, don't do what Enron did. I'll go to jail." I'm sure they all went to white collar prisons, and where they had to stay on their boats and yachts and stuff or whatever. I'm not confident that there was a ton of justice, but because I'm sure people didn't actually get paid back the things that they got stolen, which is what justice would really
is. Yeah.
But the law actually is functioning the way it should when people get caught, right? So when justice is enacted, but what she said was, we need a law that can't be broken like this, right? So that's like the law of gravity. The law of gravity can't be broken.
Right.
And so it's a fundamental understanding of the kind of place this is, when you come at it with that legal system, that understanding of the legal system as a metaphor for our scientific laws, or the laws that we discover. And it's not that things don't fall when you drop them. It's just that when we bring our cosmological assumptions to that information, our fundamental legalism to that information, we end up then being informed. We create the kind of society that reflects the kind of place we believe we live in, right? And so we believe we live in that kind of place, and so you end up with, we need scientists, we need social engineers, we need that sort of work is what reforms society, right? Is we got to get the right laws in place. We need to get and I do think we need good laws in place, but we don't even use most of the laws we have in place right now. We don't have a legal system that is swift in any sense of the word. We don't have a legal system that where everybody top to bottom can expect to receive the same justice. We don't have our legal system is flawed because we think it's supposed to be doing something that it's not, and we don't realize that it's the justice that actually turns around and makes the fool wise, right? Because we want wise people, but it's swift justice, swift stripes on the back of the wicked makes the fool wise. That's the kind of world we live in, because it's not we're not billiard balls obeying the laws of physics, and we're also not social billiard balls obeying the laws of the land, the laws of the Supreme Court, or the laws of who's the highest power right now? Right now we get a bunch of we get executive orders.
Yeah, I still think the Supreme Court is the highest power right now.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think it's going to shift, because I think after Roe v. Wade, they're like, wait a second, all their authority came underneath them. Finally, everybody's like, wait a second, they don't make laws.
Yeah.
Who makes laws really in this
funny.
Nation?
all of a sudden, congressmen are like, hey, these judges think they're out here making laws.
So
it was like, yeah, we've all been saying that.
So,
for a
Jason,
long time now.
help me with something though. So we're shaped by. So that's true. So what is the Bible talks about? Um, the beatings are for the backs of fools. Proverbs, right?
Yeah.
So it's to make the person less foolish not to do this. Don't do that, right? And then people learn wisdom from watching somebody who acts foolish. So that's the law showing people not to do something. So that's the training aspect of the law, is the justice of it, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is why like you get younger siblings that get a lot fewer spankings because they
Yep.
watch their older siblings being dumb. They're like, not doing that.
My daughter Alex complains about this. She's like, how come the younger ones don't get more spankings? Because they weren't as bad as you. Like
Right,
they
exactly.
learn from watching you not to do that stupid stuff.
They learned watching you get spankings, and they're like, not worth it.
So then when we see, so then help me. So when because right now, just this past week in the 4th of July, there's been a lot of shootings. It seems there is a climb in public catastrophes, right? There's a climb in it.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's an accident. I don't think you can do what you did and shut people up for 2 years who are already on the brink of a sinful, explosion. Yeah. And then
social psychic break.
Yeah, absolutely. And then all of a sudden put them back out in society and it's like, go act normal. And that's just good luck, buddy.
Yeah.
You're not going to get normal for a long time.
Well, and go hang out in your room all by yourself with a computer with an unlimited amount of porn and occultic. I mean, I think there's a demonic aspect to a lot of what's going on in the country as well. That was there.
Yeah.
But it was not the focus the way that it has become, or it's gained its power. But then there's not going to be justice, right? Like we're not going to get a public hanging or public execution.
No,
right? Which I think is, I mean, that's what the death penalty is for. It's for situations like this, right? This is why you have first, second, third degree murder and multiple first degree murders is a death penalty situation. You've got eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is a limiting statement. It's a limiting statement on what you can recover from somebody. But that's why the death penalty fits into that when you take multiple lives in first degree murder, because that first, second, third degree murder is a biblical category. That's something that the scriptures teach. There's first degree murder where you lie in wait to murder someone, premeditated murder. You have murder that is you did mean to kill the person, but you didn't lie in wait. It was a crime of the moment. And then you've got manslaughter, an accidental murder. That's your fault because you didn't take care to purposely avoid putting other people in danger.
Carelessness.
But you weren't trying to kill anyone.
Right.
There's different. Those are the categories of Deuteronomy, and the entire world has benefited immensely from the book of Deuteronomy because of the limitations that are put onto justice. But now we've sort of swung the other direction. So now we look at somebody and we say, well, he's got mental problems. So yeah, he killed people, but he should probably, go to a hospital for a little bit. We need to adjust his medication and then we can re-release him into the population. And you think, and you're just going to get more and more of that, right? Especially if people think they're going to be able to get off.
You just made me think of something. We have no suppression of sin in society whatsoever. So the law is working the wrong way in the way that we're using it right now. We're trying to use it on the front end and trying to get something to work in a sense like gravity. And that's not how the law is designed to work. It doesn't work that way. It's
but Paul says it does have an effect, right? It's
Yeah.
going to inflame sin if you try to use it
Right.
that
Yeah.
way.
So it does have an effect, and it inflames sins when you use it. Yeah, that's a good point. But the back end, which is a public, so for death penalty, you would see the victims of that person. You would see them in that society begin. They would toss the first stone. They would be the first person to attribute to get justice for themselves back from that person. But publicly, it was a proclamation that you don't want to be the guy down there getting stoned. Like that's not like so. Don't go around killing people. And if you were careless in such a way that it took somebody's life more than once, or your animals were careless in a way, then you also faced a certain sort of death penalty because you're not thinking highly enough of life. And those were all public. Those weren't private. Those were all public situations, institutions in society. There is nothing in the public at all. Like, for instance, I just saw R. Kelly get 30 years for supposed sex trafficking and stuff like that. I'm like, the stuff that the government's been doing has been far worse than what R. Kelly's done. Nevertheless.
Yeah.
But R. Kelly, death penalty, or not death penalty, R. Kelly gets 30 years in prison. I'm like, there's no justice in that. There's no justice in R. Kelly going to jail for 30 years.
There's no returning to the victims.
Right. What the victims
what was taken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There should be some sort of restoration given or taking place to the victims. And then whatever after that is done, so is R. Kelly. Right? Like
I don't know the details of the case, but I mean
it depends.
There's a reason there's death penalty for kidnapping. There's death penalty.
That's true too. That's true too. No, that's right.
Yeah, different. Yeah,
he might need to get the death penalty depending on some of the stuff he did. But 30 years, there's nothing that happens publicly to say, yeah, don't do that. Instead, what ends up happening is you have to pay for whatever it is that the prison that he goes to, the food that he gets, whatever that is, you're required now to pay for that. So he might as well be out just in his own place, living in his own building with just police officers around, but you have to pay for that too. There's nothing in society to suppress the wickedness of man that they see like, oh yeah, don't be wicked, which is, it makes sense now why we're getting certain things happen in society more because there isn't anything that's suppressing it.
I think though, the thing that is suppressing it is cancel culture. I mean, I think you have to have something, right? If it's not going to be the legal system, it's going to end up being the social fabric. And right now that's cancel culture, right? That's what, as messed up as the definitions of righteous and unrighteous are, and it is the closest thing you've got to the public suppression of unrighteousness. And this is the problem, but part of the problem with it is there is no trial. There's no jury of your peers.
It's a mob rule.
None of that. It is. It's the rule of the god Demos, who is incredibly violent. But he demands sacrifice. He'll get them.
But then that kind of justice system that's running rampant in the world is only going to make the person become more like what it is they did. So if cancel culture, there's no restorativeness to that person. So let's say that somebody stole something or did something that somebody didn't like, or said something. Cancel culture doesn't give a chance for restitution. And so that person leaves without actually being transformed or any sort of real justice happening. And so now they just turn into twice the son of hell as they were before. Right? Because now they really don't have no place in society. He might as well lean all the way in.
Yeah, they have to go out and live amongst the tombs. I mean, that's what I think that's actually why there was two guys actually living out amongst the tombs, the ones that Jesus heals. I think it was some sort of primitive cancel culture. Everybody else is able to continue existing because that guy out there is the one where we send all the demons, you know, or he's the one that holds all the demons out of the city with some sort of, I mean, it's such a weird story. There's got to be more to it, you know? Because you think, how did he end up there? Because when he gets healed, sends him back into the city, and they ask Jesus to go away because they say, hey, we need him there, right? Like, they don't want him healed. They don't want him forgiven. They don't want, right? Which is exactly what happens, you know, when somebody gets canceled, somebody gets, thrown out of the society, thrown out of the community, and then Jesus comes along and rescues them. And they say, you know what? I found forgiveness. People say, no, you can't. There is no forgiveness. And this is not, they don't even believe in objective guilt, right? They just don't want people not feeling guilty, because you have to self-flagellate, self-accuse when, according to the way, I mean, it's really hard once you study just a little ancient religion and ancient societal structure. Read something like Sophocles, and then you see cancel culture. It looks like a religious ritual. It looks like the tearing apart of the victim, who has to self-accuse before you tear him apart, for the society to be restored. Right. I mean, that's what you get in Sophocles and in Aeschylus, and I mean, even in the book of Job, you've got an attempt at it. They're trying to get Job to admit his own sin, right? The whole time, you've got to just admit your own sin, and they're trying to restore something in the society by scapegoating this person. But the self-accusation is a really important part of the scapegoating process, because if you've got an actual goat and you can lean your hands on it, and then the goat agrees, you know, the goat can't disagree with with the fact that it's now taken your sins,
right?
Whereas if you've got somebody who gets accused of something, if they won't apologize, I mean, if they do apologize, then everyone says, good, now and tear them piece to piece, and we're justified, and the peace is restored by their destruction, right? That their head rolls and everybody feels better. The volcano now won't explode because we've thrown this person who has admitted that they should be killed into it. So, it looks like, I mean, I think the cancel culture just looks like an ancient religious ritual to me.
Well, yeah, of course, because they got to replace it with something. Man, they're religious, and so they have to put something in place that's
you need a sacrifice. You need somebody that takes your sin away, or the society tears itself to pieces. And so either a person is torn asunder, torn to pieces, on behalf of the society, or the society falls apart, because sin is too destructive. It's a force that it's such a destructive force. So, you know,
I was listening to, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and that's, you see that with cancel culture. You see that with the way politics work right now. I mean, everybody's looking for a scapegoat so that their little community can continue to be a community.
This is why, so you have a lot of Christians who are very heavenly minded, that they're no earthly good. You ever heard that term before? So they really are focusing on this individual sanctification along with whoever else is in their church, and that's about it. They have no care really for this world, for politics, anything like that, or just society, period. They're just they find there are two things: abortion because it's murder, that's bad. Slavery, shouldn't do that. They find the big things and like, yeah, we're not opposed. We're opposed to that stuff, but then they don't have any sort of worldview on how society should run. But one of the things that I was thinking about this weekend and that we've forgotten as Christians is the fact that all societies, every society, regardless of where they are all trying to deal with sin. So government, local government, no matter what it is, all of them are trying to deal with the problem of sin in some way. And Christians know how to deal with the problem of sin, but then they don't engage in any of these other spheres because this world and the world that they're looking to is there's two separate things, completely separate. So that they don't have any sort of heart application or theology to apply to this world. It seems like all the Bible is good for is sanctification for them, and that's it, right? I'm just getting sanctified. I'm just getting holy. But they live in a society where all around them is trying to set up structures. We were just talking about laws, something to deal with the fall. So everything that we see in society, everything that, like even the fireworks, the reason, if you looked at it from the best perspective that you can, the reason that they don't want people popping fireworks is because they're trying to keep people from hurting each other. They're trying to keep the danger away so that no one gets killed. No one loses a hand, right? No one. So because they know that men are sinful, and in their sinfulness, they'll do stupid and dumb things. And so their whole goal is to try and work to limit sin in society. That is an inescapable concept. And Christians have the ability to really operate with a sin quencher, and then they won't bring that to society to give it to. Like, they won't operate in society outside of a particular sect. Well, that role's not for me. Well, it should be. You should be engaged in it somehow because you're the only person who knows. You know where the real scapegoat is. You know how sin really gets forgiven. And I was just thinking about that this weekend. It's like, we act as if, and I think it was our last conversation when you were talking about guilt, because even in my head, guilt was a supernatural or spiritual thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't something that was, no, this is guilty. Like, oh, like in a legal sense.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then it changes. That started morph with how some of my cosmological foundations. And so that's what got me down the road of thinking. It's like, well, then if that's the case, then everything in society is dealing with that problem, right? The government is, the police officers are there because they're trying to deal with the problem of sin that happened in the garden. Our legislators are there because everything that they do are trying to deal with sin. It's not like they're just randomly there trying to create laws. No. They're trying to deal with the fall.
Right. But here's what I think happens though for a lot of people, is because we don't have a concept of jurisdictions. We don't have people that know what to actually do when they're supposed to take responsibility, when they're supposed to seek the good of their city, take responsibility for their city, Christians do the same thing that the rest of the world does, and we flatten all of the jurisdictions into one. And so we think when we say we need to be engaged in for the good of society, we think that means it's important who we vote for president. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So is this kind of like with offices too? Like when you were talking about with offices?
Yep, with offices as well. So jurisdictions, the fundamental jurisdictions are my, everything froze up on my screen. Are we still good?
Yeah, we're still good. Yeah.
Okay. The fundamental jurisdictions are civic government, ecclesiastical government, family government, and
Yep.
self-government.
Right.
Right. And when we say, "Hey, we've got to do something," everybody thinks that means civic realm, and it means highest powers in the land.
Yeah.
You have people,
Yeah.
yes, Machiavellian. We've got to get the highest power in the land, forming culture and society into the right thing, because that's where it happens. Right? It happens from wherever the highest power is gathered. Then they have the power to form reality. So we think in those Machiavellian terms, not in terms of the way God actually created the world, which is that you've actually got a series of jurisdictions. And then those jurisdictions are even then divided further.
Yeah.
So they're, an ecclesiastical jurisdiction, but there's not there have to be a single authority that holds that full worldwide ecclesiastical jurisdiction. That doesn't have to happen, because we're not Machiavellians. I was thinking the other day about what actually is the cosmological precursor to Machiavelli, and I think it's the papal revolution of the 13th century. You had the Holy Roman Emperor was said to he was established in the seat of Paul, and the see of Paul, or the seat of Paul, and the Bishop of Rome was said to be established in the see, or the seat of Peter. He was the descendant of Peter, and the reason was because God actually established multiple authorities that were there to keep one another in balance, to keep one another in check. So even at the highest authority in the church at the time, because this was you had basically a fight for the highest authority, in the highest ecclesiastical authority going on at the time, but the Pope, so in 800 the Pope put the crown on Charlemagne, and it sort of metaphorically began shifting even civil powers into the ecclesiastical hands. Then 400 years or so before you had a actual Pope who viewed himself as the supreme head of the world, who also then went after the authority of the emperor. And so the Pope began signing all of his papal bulls, his official communications, from the see of Peter and Paul. Right? So it was a major revolution of authority. But the emperor at the time, the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, he was a humble guy who said, "Okay, well, I don't want to grasp after authority," and he is the representative of Christ on earth, and he didn't defend his authority. And it wasn't until the Reformation that you had the re-separation of powers.
Yeah.
So God, the civic and ecclesiastical authorities were re-separated, and that was one of the needs of the Reformation, was the realization that that God didn't establish authorities that flowed down a mountain like a creek, or like a river, where you had the highest authority at the top, and then every authority was in line like that, but that you actually had overlapping jurisdictions. So the reestablishment of overlapping jurisdictions, in the Reformation, was actually a return to something that you had earlier, but it was over against that papal revolution. But Machiavelli took that understanding of authority and secularized it, and then the Enlightenment runs with it and kind of reaches its fever pitch in World War I, from like World War I to the Vietnam War. That's the That's the Enlightenment peak, modernism's peak. So, but what we need to do is reestablish an understanding of jurisdictions, that so we don't say, hey, you need to get involved in the shaping of culture, and that means, let me tell you how to vote. Because that's what most people actually mean by it.
Can I tell you why I think they mean that, though? I think that everyone looks, no one wants to do the hard work, and everybody wants it microwavable, right?
Right. Yes.
Like that's the thing. When you look at the current power structures, it seems like you can get what would come over time with your family, with that sphere, would come over time and faithfulness to your church. You think that, oh, well, shoot, if I can just go right here to the federal government, it's not like I can get that much faster. Like that's the microwave, right? If we could just get that, then the microwave will happen and boom, we're there. But when you talk about going into other jurisdictions, it seems like the time frame for success is multiplied by 3.
Yeah, 30 maybe. But yeah, I mean,
I'm thinking 3 lifetimes.
It's the same. It's the same though. It's because we think we have our fundamental metaphors about what kind of place we live in are mechanical, right? They're physics metaphors, and legal, right? So we have this machine that runs, and the levers that build and construct and run the machine are laws, right? So that's our metaphor. Whereas the scriptural understanding is organic metaphors, and then music, right? Those are kind of the scriptural, more scriptural metaphors. And so the hierarchies are not mechanical; they're organic, right? So you look at when my daughter graduated recently, they gave her a plant. It was a little oak tree, and I went out to water it yesterday, and one of the leaves has a disease, and you think, oh, okay, you got to pluck it, but who knows if the disease spread yet, right?
Right.
We'll find out eventually. It might, but that one diseased leaf may end up actually killing the whole tree, but you just don't know yet. You pluck the tree, you do what you can, you water it, you fertilize, you do what you can, but there's something fundamentally mysterious about the cause and effect in organic, in an organic setting that you don't have in a setting of on a pool, billiard balls, in a machine, where you go in and you find the piece that's broken, you take it out. If you've got a clock, you find the gear that has a missing tooth, you either replace the gear or replace the tooth, you put it back in, and then it works again. Mankind and our relationship to creation is an organic relationship. So you say, well, what are my jurisdictions? So I'm in a church. So I'm a church member, maybe a church elder or a church deacon or a pastor, right? So I've got a jurisdiction there. I have a family. I've got a jurisdiction there. I'm a son. Maybe I'm a daughter. I'm a father, a mother. I'm not really a huge animal person, but we've gotten my kids animals at different times so that they have a little jurisdiction, to practice on. You're raising people up into their jurisdictions, and then you've got a neighborhood, you've got a house, you've got a yard, then you've got work, you've got your place of employment, or the business you own, whatever it is. You've got all these overlapping jurisdictions, and then we also vote. Sometimes we're on juries. We vote at city, county, state levels, and then so federal. The smaller the jurisdiction and the closer you are to the head of it, the more influence you have. Right. So, and they're the places where God has given you the ability to really form something important and lasting. Right. The higher up, the further you are from the top of the jurisdiction, the less influence you have there. And so I can see why people that think the place that culture is formed is from the seat of the president, from the Oval Office, get really discouraged, especially when you vote because you have one vote out of
right.
However many millions there are that are real, and the ballot stuffing and whatever. You've got all of this. People just say, this place is going to hell in a handbasket, and there's nothing I can do about it. But in reality, the most effective thing you can do is be a good parent, be a good neighbor, be a good church member, because those are jurisdictions that as well. I mean, they
just don't seem powerful, Jason. Just telling you, man. I just want to, I just gonna keep it real. I just want to make people do what I want them to do. Let's just be honest.
Right.
Let's just everybody keep it up all 100 right now. We want people to do what the heck we tell them to do. Stop killing folks. That's what we want, man.
Totally. I mean, and that's what's so hard is, I mean, we were talking about that 2 Corinthians 10 passage.
Yeah.
And how hard it is to think about obedience the way Paul does, right? Paul, what's his goal? To bring into captivity every thought towards the obedience of Christ, right? So he wants people to obey Jesus, right? He wants people to truly live abundant lives, which is what the describes.
Yeah.
So he wants people to love Jesus and obey him. But if you back through the passage, he does it. He says by dealing with our imagination and our idolatry, right? That the place where our imaginations are not in line with the way God actually made the world and Jesus and how Jesus rules it, and the things that we put in place of Jesus as the one who rules this world, right? So he says, that's what I spent my life doing, right? Because there were people in Corinth that had come in with legalistic plans, that had come in with particular, with a legalistic system that if you just employ this externally, then you will become obedient people, right? But Paul says, I spent my life on you, right? I spent my life for you, and you've got to remember what it was that I dealt with in order to bring you to obedience, the formation of your imagination into the lordship of Christ, and the idolatries where you trusted in something other than Jesus for your identity, for your provision, for your protection, right? Those when we dealt with those idols and you repented of that idolatry, and when your imagination was formed, he says, then your every thought was captive towards the obedience of Christ, right? Obedience suddenly was the thing that started to make sense, right? Obedience now was the thing that you wanted to do, right? You wanted to follow Jesus. You wanted to do what he said, and it's what made sense to you because your imagination was formed in a particular way. Your trust, your faith was not being wasted on idols, right? And then we back further in. That's when he says, "We walk in the flesh, but we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not bodily; they're not carnal. They're not. They're mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds." Right. So he says we didn't deal in a fleshly way with you, where we thought we could just get you to go through a particular system or do something, and then you would suddenly become.
We didn't put laws
holy.
on you to make you, right?
Right. We didn't. It wasn't rulishness. It wasn't a bunch of rules that turned you into that. He said what we dealt all the way with your spirit, with your imagination, with your idolatry, and he said because we didn't walk according to the flesh, right? We didn't solve a problem with a new set of rules. We aimed at the formation of your desires, which flow out of your imagination, and they flow out of your fundamental faith, your faith commitments, right? The things you trust, and your desires flow from what you believe you can trust, and your imagination, right? So I say all the time to people, failures of faith begin as failures of the imagination, because of Paul here saying that exact same thing. And people are always like, man, that's really quaint, that's cute, or that's but
so
we don't realize how fundamental our fundamental commitments, imaginatively and in terms of our faith and trust, affect our desires.
So is this an issue of ignorance, or is this an issue of faithlessness, or is it both?
It's both. Sometimes one, sometimes the other, and a combination. We're always way more complicated, but I think there was faithlessness in previous generations that was passed down, and then there was, but then also there is just a fundamental ignorance. I mean, think about. So in our church, we're going through the book of Micah, and the sermon this last week was really good, but it was where Micah says, let's look at the mountains. Let's let them be the jury, right? The mountains will be the jury between us and God. And look out, because of your sin, they are going to fall on you. Right. And it is a metaphor. It's a poetic metaphor, but it's also, he's saying reality functions a certain way, right? You don't actually have the power to change reality. So the mountains can adjudicate because they simply, just by existing, right? If you say, I'm going to act against nature, against natures of things, nature of things, against reality, your sin will begin its punishment right away, because you actually can't act against reality, right? So if you say, I'm going to eat all the seed, you're not going to have a harvest next season. Right? Reality works a particular way. And in Micah's day, their idolatry, through idolatry, it was the equivalent of wasting their seed. And so they were going to be going into exile. Well, we were in, we went to see, really I went to see the new Elvis with my teenagers, and there was this just gay movie in the beginning, and this guy goes, makes some comment like, you guys remember straight people? Yeah, they had their day, but they're done. And my 16-year-old son, as soon as it got quiet, he was like, "No straight people means no more people." Really loud in the theater. It was so funny. And there was this really awkward laughter.
Everybody,
Right? So
yeah.
yeah, and what's so funny is it's totally, I mean, everybody knows it's true, right? No straight people means no children. Like there's no next generation. So you can fight against reality and pretend, but the mountains are that what they are. They're going to judge.
It's funny you bring that up. There is a part of, I think, the reality that the other side is hoping on is, yeah, we know that no straight people means no more people, but we know that you're going to just keep producing and giving us whatever it is that, right? They are counting on a certain truth about reality,
Right.
themselves in order to exist, and it's kind of the same way we were talking about this a little bit. But you saw the Daily Wire came out with Jordan Peterson I thought that was a massive, great move. Right, that was a great move for them to sign Jordan Peterson up on their platform now. So he's officially with the Daily Wire Plus. It's not like they needed any more intellectual power over there, but boy, they're just a massive intellectual powerhouse over there with Jordan Peterson. Yeah. So they did that, and within the week, they had Dave Rubin did an interview with Jordan Peterson talking about gay parenting and the pitfalls of gay parenting. And I'm like, you got the guy who is kind of like the king of the message of masculinity, 12 rules of living of life. I mean, you couldn't put with him a more degrading narrative with his message than Dave Rubin and gay parenting, right? It's like, you couldn't be more upside down.
It was, and more tone deaf to who your audience is. I thought that was really interesting too.
Well, that's the part that I was rocked by, was like, are they tone deaf? Or are they saying something else? And so either, because I would have thought with all of the Disney gay queer stuff that has been rampant inside of the conservative movement, like, yeah, we're not going that way. No, we're not queering it up. Nope. It's like queer has become synonymous with critical race theory, right? Those two things, like they're queer theory, critical race theory, they've merged together, and all the Christian conservatives are like, no way, we're not going down that road. And here they go talking about gay parenting. I'm like, wait, are you getting your walking orders from Disney? Have they given you your talking points? What is going on here? And go ahead.
I think their cosmology gave them their talking points. They just share the cosmology.
Yeah, but even a marketing crew has to be like, hey guys, this is not a good idea at all. Right? Even the marketing production point said, well, Disney took a long time before they decided to release stuff like that. I don't even think Disney has released anything that on the nose.
They released a short, but yeah, nothing that on the nose.
Where you get like, it's like taking, could you imagine them with Disney taking Captain America and making him gay? That's the same thing. That's basically what they did, right? They took Jordan Peterson and had a conversation with Dave Rubin and said, "What gay parenting and Christians take it." Right?
Right.
And so, I mean, even Disney kind of warms you up a little bit. Hey, we're going to put a gay kiss in. They kind of have snuck it in. I mean, the last Marvel, what was it? The multi-universe Doctor Strange last film.
Yeah.
And that one, the girl was wearing a flag. I was like, oh man, it's coming. But then her parents, were both lesbians in another multi-universe somewhere over there,
Okay.
But it's still
I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah. They threw it in.
They're slipping it in though.
They're slipping it. But dude, Daily Wire didn't slip it in. Like, that was just flagrant. My whole point is, I'm thinking that they're saying, forget you Christians. Like, you don't matter anymore. In one sense, you're irrelevant. You're not an audience that we need to play to. We are going towards a conservative group of people, and this is our direction, our trajectory. And if you want to come with us, great. But this is where we're going. And go ahead.
I think they don't actually know what it is they're trying to accomplish. I mean, like, because it's like, well, what are you actually trying to
be big?
Like,
they're trying to be big. They want to be powerful.
Yeah, I think they've got that same Machiavellian assumption. Right. Look, once we get powerful enough, we can shape it the way we want it. This is the best way to power. Then you start to say, well, then what are we trying to shape it to? I mean, you're not gonna be any different, right? You're not offering a real alternative. I mean, maybe we get to keep our guns. Is that the alternative?
No, because they like red flag laws.
Alternative. If that's the whole alternative,
Well, you won't need them.
That's not enough.
I mean, you're already being in prison. Like, the way the world will work, this is, anyway, I don't even talk about COVID again and guns. Those two things, I would have thought people would have been like, yeah, we ain't doing that because we got guns, period. But that didn't help anybody. It didn't really matter. But there is a reality that if they're going to bite off the whole homosexual movement in some, it's almost like the Civil Rights Act and Civil Rights Movement. Civil Rights Movement did the same thing, where you got Martin Luther King Jr.'s 2 homosexual speechwriters, right? And they had a moral high ground, but they compromised with that. And so then they had to pay for that when it came time. And they're paying for it right now. And like, hey, the homosexual movement is cashing in their chips with the black culture. Like, okay, man, hey, we were with y'all. We supported you guys. You guys owe us now. And so you have, now they want to amend the Civil Rights Act with homosexuality and all that stuff, it mixed into it. So, but there is a part of reality that, the Daily Wire, if Christians would say, yeah, we are not going to embrace that, even though it seems legitimately powerful. The Daily Wire is growing. I mean, I think they have close to 600,000 club members now. They're doing movies. They have hundreds of millions of dollars set aside for films and for movies, and they're going to be doing stuff. And they're going to be an alternative to what we see. They're going to do kids' films too. And, I mean, I'm just thinking to myself, is Dave Rubin going to be a part of the kids? You know what I mean? Like, we just left this.
We're going to do
right.
Say that's yeah. This so. All right. I think we got to back up just a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
That because I think that the civil rights movement is a good example, but I think we don't tell the true story of the civil rights movement very well.
Yeah,
and I think that's why we're still getting, they're still, going over the top on us in the arm wrestle. Because we don't actually tell that story properly.
Sylvester Stallone movies for $200, Bob. Nobody even caught that. Sylvester Stallone films for $200.
Oh yeah,
most people don't even know over the top. They like
that was my Stallone reference for the day.
Hey, if you knew that reference, like, somebody deserves something free.
Yeah, I know for sure. I'll send you a free copy of my book In Pursuit of Kindness if you knew that reference. Next, I'll be referencing Gleaming the Cube. That'll be. But we have because the civil rights movement. So Nietzsche, he was a classicist. We talked about him some before, but he had a a descriptive theory of culture that there were two competing spirits in the culture, but he didn't believe that they were metaphysically real spirits, but that he called them the Apollonian and the Dionysian spirit. And the Apollonian was the spirit of self-control, the spirit of organization, the spirit of kind of the stoic acceptance of things, that held things together by holding back desires, right? So the spirit of the suppression of desires that made society possible, but that by suppressing those desires, that there was a force that was building behind the dam, but the Apollonian dam, that was the Dionysian desire, the Dionysian release of desires. So Dionysus was the god of, he was the god of wine, the god, he was worshipped with orgiastic lesbianism, honestly, that was murderous. We don't realize how good we've got it yet. Yeah. So, and that the longer you kept the longer you kept the Apollonian pressure on, then the more buildup of the Dionysian spirit that you got, and then it needed to be released every once in a while. And when it was, and he just said that is when you've got so that law exists as a coercive power to keep the Apollonian spirit in place, but that because of that, there was this pressure that builds up in a Dionysian release. And he shows through the ancient world how that works, and he shows that's something that he expects to continue happening. Freud takes that societal understanding and he individualizes it into his theory of the id and the superego creating the ego together. And it was a really influential understanding, but it's also something that without Christ is inevitable. Right? And that is actually his point. He wants to remove even the memory of Jesus because he thinks Jesus weakens society. Because it turns us into servants of one another. He called it a slave religion. It turns us into servants of one another when we actually need to we need people desiring and searching for power and willing to, step on one another and destroy one another, kill one another, because that's how you get to the best thing. Right, that evolutionary mentality that survival of the fittest produces the best thing.
That's way better.
Yeah, right. And he was really straightforward and honest that he thought that was how you got that struggle was the way, which in German is Kampf, right? So mein Kampf means my struggle, right? It's Hitler coming along saying, "Here's how I got to the top." In that to become Nietzsche's Superman, Nietzsche's Übermensch. That's what Mein Kampf is about, is how Hitler came through struggle to become the next phase of the evolution of mankind psychologically. So, or psychically, not really psychologically, but so you have that actually. That is one of the things that's going on in the 50s and the early 60s, right? Is you actually have this Dionysian release is an opposition to the Apollonian oppression of desires. So Paul comes along and says we actually transform our desires from wanting what's wrong to wanting right. And so then we become people that obey the law, obey, you conform to reality, obey Christ, love our neighbor willingly. We don't just suppress the bad desires. We transform our desires until our desires are properly ordered, and we want the right thing. Without Jesus, what you can do is suppress the desires. And Nietzsche's absolutely right that if that's what you're doing, that at times you get releases in order to restore order. So you have that going on in the 50s and in the 50s and the 60s, post World War II. You have this Apollonian suppression kind of reaching a fever pitch. So you've got violence, you've got assassinations going on, you've got riots, you've got all this stuff that's going on right at the time. That is just Enlightenment forward motion of society. It's how you expect it to go. It's how it's going. At the same time, you have a conflict between the Enlightenment and the church. Right, so you have that is the civil rights movement. So the church is finally rising up and saying, and taking its jurisdiction seriously. In our neighborhoods, you've got the dehumanization of people that is unacceptable. Right, so the civil rights movement is a movement of the church as the church rises up against the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment actually taught that different people with different colored skin are different sorts of humans, that they should be treated differently, that they should be kept separate, that it's a law of biology, that there was the laws of biology that they should be kept separate. There were people writing academic papers on the separation of the races, and even Planned Parenthood started with sort of an academic journal, where with these academic papers on the need for the weeding of the human race, to keep it pure, because the racial purity was an Enlightenment. It was an Enlightenment ideal, right? And so you have this.
It was White Boy Summer before White Boy Summer,
right? Yeah, you've got this growing concern with racial purity in the Enlightenment, and the church finally wakes up and was like, "Wait a second, that's not right." Right? The racial purity is the wrong categorization. Loving your neighbor is not a racial. You don't racially divide and then love people of one race and not the other. We're all neighbors. That the human race is the race, and we love one another. And so we've got people not being treated like people, and so the church rises up right in the same moment that you've got this Apollonian Dionysian conflict that has been coming and is about to arrive. The two conflicts end up getting conflated in our storytelling. Right. So, and that's the way that the Enlightenment has turned around and claimed the advancement that the church made by combining their conflict, the inner Enlightenment conflict, with the Enlightenment of the church with the Enlightenment, of the conflict with the church with the Enlightenment. Right. So, and so now when we tell the story, we actually don't separate out those two things. Right. So you end up, so like the people that were opposing, so the people that were opposing Elvis because he was singing black music, were Enlightenment people. They weren't, but they were also opposing the church, which was saying you've got to treat black people humanely, like humans. They were not opposing them for the same reasons, and that doesn't mean that what was going on with that Dionysian rise of rock and roll was the same thing that was going on in the civil rights movement, right? that those were not the same thing. Now there was overlap, partly because there's gospel music, right? It's complex because there's gospel music, because Elvis was playing with black musicians, and actually, but jazz had already started integrating long before this.
Yeah.
And that didn't cause the same sort of societal uproar. What caused the societal uproar was the Dionysian rise of the teenager, right? That's what was causing the societal uproar. When you had black and white jazz musicians play together, there were places that would say, no, you can't play here. But it was the guy that played the clarinet, and he added Lionel Hampton to his quartet, and refused to play anywhere that wouldn't allow Lionel Hampton in. Man, why can I not think of that guy's name? He was a great musician, but he just said it was like, what music? You don't music doesn't have a color. You're either a great musician or you're not.
Right.
And I want to play with the best musicians there are. Lionel Hampton's the best. Because the guy was brilliant, but they were both just brilliant musicians. And he looked at it and he said, this is not matching up with reality, right? Your division of black and white is not matching up with reality, right? Let's let the mountains decide. Let's let the mountains be the jury. Are you lining things up with the reality or not? No, this man's my friend. He's a great musician. And I know reality, and so he insisted. Well, I can't think of his name. We have to.
Clifford Brown, Wes Montgomery.
No, Montgomery's. And that guy's a great guitar player. Oops, but that didn't cause the sort of
Benny Goodman.
Benny Goodman, yeah, yep. So that didn't cause the sort of societal upheaval that rock and roll did, and it wasn't just because he was playing music that black people had written. It was because there was actually this whole teen revolt against the Apollonian spirit that was very Dionysian. It came and it went, right? And people want to say that led to the sexual revolution, and that there were parts of there were things that there were like mini sexual revolutions going on, but it didn't lead to any sort of major sexual revolution. There was an upheaval, and then it died back down, because that's how the Enlightenment dealt with the fact that they were using coercive means to oppress people's desires. Every once in a while, there was a major release, there was violence, there was sexual promiscuity, there are all sorts of things, and then it died back down and it went back to normal. That coinciding with aspects of coinciding historically with aspects of the civil rights movement is not the same thing as those two things being the same. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was willing to use aspects of what was going on for his purposes, and I think that's because his project was a mixed bag in terms of its goals.
Yeah.
But there's no doubt that it was the church coming into conflict with the Enlightenment about the nature of people that actually was the driving force of the civil rights movement as a whole. Martin Luther King Jr. was a great speaker, and he became the public face in many ways of the movement. But the movement itself was a church movement, right? It was pastors organizing people to say, hey, humans should be treated like humans, which was something that the Enlightenment had taught against, right?
Or at least redefine what humans were, or who humans were.
And so how this ends up being used against conservatives is because it was the left, right? It was the left-wing Enlightenment parties that pushed racism, that wanted It wasn't a conservative movement, so to speak. I mean, the rebirth of the Conservative Party hadn't even really happened yet. And what you ended up, but what ends up happening is the way the story is retold is that somehow those folks from the KKK that were all Democrats, that stood up and opposed Elvis, are equated with the churches, the Christians, and the conservatives at the time, because they didn't want Elvis singing black music because they were racists. Unlike us, we leftists who supported the civil rights movement, and that somehow that is the story that ends up being told, right? It ends up being retold and conflated into a story where the people that were trying to preserve the Apollonian coercive force of the Enlightenment that had been used to separate races, that somehow those were the conservative, right? But those were the Enlightenment progressives. I mean, they were there's a reason that Time magazine had Hitler as Man of the Year on the cover twice. Right? The Enlightenment conservatives, the Enlightenment progressives were very racist, anti-Semitic, and they wanted an coercive power at the top that held everything in line, because there was no way to change desires directly. You had to do it through laws, because of that cosmological understanding that laws form society, the way the laws of physics form nature into its shape.
So, okay, talking about taking it back. So then in that, what is the Daily Wire in that though? Where are they fit in that?
So it's the don't want to be on the wrong side of history argument, right? The law has changed. The law has changed, right? The law, it legalized it. Everything that Rubin is doing, is it Dave Rubin?
Yeah.
It's all legal. So we can't come in and say it's wrong, right? The laws of the land shape reality. So you're opposing.
They don't believe
reality.
that though. They can't believe that because they are completely opposed to Roe v. Wade.
I would say they don't believe it in the attic. They believe it in the foundation. So they don't have any defense against it.
So are you saying that they're the kind of folks that if it became illegal, homosexuality became illegal, they would be like, yeah, that's wrong?
I think so. I mean, that's the fundamental legalism of modernity.
So then
fundamental legalism of the Enlightenment. Man, Ben Shapiro, he's an Enlightenment guy. I mean, he'll tell you that if you ask him. That's why that Russell Brand interview was so, I think, important. And it's unfortunate that Christians don't understand that Shapiro is an Enlightenment guy. He's not a conservative.
Yeah, I see that when it comes to gun stuff. I start realizing that he's faulty. Like, he doesn't have a problem with red flag laws, and I start seeing other things break down where it's like, wait a second, that's not conservatism.
He's brilliant.
Oh yeah,
he is self-consciously an Enlightenment Jew, right? Like a Maimonides Enlightenment rationalistic Jew. And there were a number of really prominent Jewish philosophers in the Enlightenment. So he's within a particular tradition. It's only a couple hundred years old, late 1700s, but he's within a particular tradition of Judaism, philosophical Judaism. So it's not really religious. I think he is himself more religious, but philosophically he's Enlightenment Jew. And so in that he's more like he's more in line with somebody like Kant or Hegel than he is with and even then conservative. So he's a conservative progressive. He's a slow progressive. He's a right-wing progressive.
But so many evangelicals fit right in there with him, though.
Yeah,
Right.
because we have the same assumptions. Because we swallow them from revivalism, right? There's a theological progressive.
Wait. Are you saying that
there's theological enlightenment?
Okay.
The enlightenment of the American church through revivalism.
So we have enlightenment hitting us in both ways. We have a secular form of enlightenment, and then we have a revivalistic, reformed / a form of enlightenment coming from us on both sides. Work through that one. How does revivalism bring us into an? So this is all cosmological, though, right? Like it's
all cosmological, yeah.
Okay.
So the basic assumptions of the Enlightenment is that there's a fundamental chaos, and the chaos is the regenerative principle, and we order the chaos through power. Right. So that's the cosmological.
All is chaos. We order it through power.
Yeah, we order it through power. So, theologically, the anxious bench, the revivalistic understanding that you've got to really like work somebody's emotions up really high, and then through that chaos, a new order in their life is going to come about.
Shut up.
It's the same thing. I mean, it's the communist revolution of the soul.
That's my whole charismatic life growing up.
I know. I mean, this is where it's so hard, because you got good men and women that love the Lord who have been, who have been told this is actually the way the cosmos works, right? That they are coming in line with the nature of reality through these experiences. It is not the way the world works, right? That is a false assumption. That actually the chaos only came in later, right? That you had a fundamentally ordered and unified universe. That any sort of disunity, rolls up out of sin, not out of original intention. And when we oppose sin, we're actually returning to the ordered, integrated.
Okay, so couldn't somebody say
organic?
Couldn't they argue is like the argument be, yeah, that was what you're talking about, Jason, is before the fall. Now after the fall, man, all bets off. It's a different world out there since the fall. And so before the fall, maybe the way you understood the cosmos is correct. But after the fall, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there.
Maybe before Jesus became the one who took all authority in heaven and on earth and restored it. But I mean, now the curse is broken. It's undone. It's being rolled back. And I mean, the Jesus is Lord of all, right? He's Lord of heaven, and he's Lord of earth. He's Lord of hell. He's Lord of things top to bottom. So you might say, well, hey, the throne up there is empty because Adam and gave it up, right? Adam walked away from his authority, but the throne isn't empty anymore, right? The new Adam is actually seated on the throne. So that's our whole job, is now to restore the fruitfulness, right? Or this is how Colossians opens. Right. Right, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, right? We give thanks to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, praying always for you. And then verse 9, for this cause we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you and to desire that you might be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, right? That we'd have the knowledge and understanding that we lost in Adam, that you might walk worthy of the Lord unto all pleasing, being fruitful in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. right? So he says, well, what is it that Paul prays for the Colossians? What's all the things that Adam is told that he was supposed to do? Be fruitful and multiply, right? But he's like, but now it's on a whole grand cosmic scale. It's not just the Garden of Eden anymore. It's not just the land surrounding the Garden of Eden anymore. Now there's a cosmic restoration of the knowledge of good and evil, a cosmic restoration of be fruitful and multiply. Right now, Paul says he's praying that we take that to a whole nother level beyond just the Garden of Eden, but that the church spreads throughout the whole world and gardenizes the whole thing. So, I mean, the church is the garden of God. It's the family of God, and the pastors, are described as leading the house of God well, gardening the garden of the Lord. There's all this. This is it's a restoration project, and if you think in order to accomplish the restoration of a house that you got to knock the whole thing down every generation, you're not going to get very far in your restoration project.
And maybe that's why we don't.
But that's that.
Yeah,
that's the Enlightenment understanding.
Is that you got to knock everything down in order to be able to.
Got to knock everything down. You need the constant revolution, right? That's why it. I mean, Karl Marx teaches this explicitly, right? That you need a constant revolution to move society forward to its new economic status, to its new what you're after. You need a constant revolution. You can't ever let up. So if you've got a bit of revolution, that's fine, but you have to actually move the revolution into a constant state, right? That you need that constant revolution, and which we don't understand what's being done. We don't understand how often that's being done to us. That it doesn't. That so long as we live in this responsive state, as conservatives and Christians respond, and we're upset about whatever the next thing is, right? They're winning, right? They're getting their constant revolution. We just keep
responding,
playing into it, responding. So long as we respond, they keep winning because they keep getting the constant revolution, keep being able to create the chaos to move things forward.
Yeah, that was
revolution wise.
That was what a friend recently just told me when I was bringing up to him kind of like the failure of the Daily Wire stuff, and I was like, man, like this is messed up, and he basically pointed out and was like, yeah, but what are you doing?
Yeah,
like they're doing something.
Yeah.
They got a vision. They're building something. They're going a particular way, and what are you doing? Like what?
Dwight Moody was the one who said, "I like my way of doing it better than your way of not doing it."
Yeah, I was like,
right? He's talking about evangelism, but yeah. I mean, criticism and critics risk nothing, but they also build nothing, right?
Yeah,
I think we have raised a generation that thinks criticism is doing something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually, if you look at our apologetics, that's what our apologetics looks like. It looks like, well, because we can give the best critique. And I think that's how conservatives exist and live, is if we can give the best critique of something, then we've done something to the culture.
We've accomplished something.
Yes.
And
but
then it's a little like saying, hey, I burned down my neighbor's fields. Mine must be growing really well.
Tomorrow, what?
So mine must be growing really well. Like,
right? Yeah, That's actually a good line. That's exactly
because even Paul in Corinthians, his whole point is when we want to affect the broader culture, so we should obey Jesus in the church. Or when the church is obeying Jesus, they'll come to us and they'll say, man, your garden grows really, how are you doing that? Right. But we're out there wanting the death penalty when we won't even excommunicate. Right. We want the civic government
Ah,
to to kill people, and we won't, but the church won't excommunicate. I mean, I think we, and when a church does, when a church enacts church discipline with justice, it is a blessing to the people in the church. I remember a young lady once coming into my office and saying, "Hey, if I did such and such a thing, would you excommunicate me?" And I said, "I mean, we'd go through the process, but the elders would excommunicate you." Yeah. She's like, "I thought so." She's like, "Okay, I'm not going to do that." I don't know what I should do, though. That's the thing I want to do, but I know that would be the response of the church. And so I need help not doing it and doing the right thing instead. But you need to help me figure out what it is. And I was like, okay, the church discipline's working, right? We'd had a number of instances.
well, and that's another level of church discipline right there too, though, right? The church discipline
it was beautiful. It was beautiful because the church discipline actually revealed to her desires where they were crooked.
Yeah.
And she was able to come in and say, "Hey, the justice that I saw there has revealed to me some foolishness, but I'm hopeless against it. Help." Right? Which was beautiful. Then you can surround, you can prop, you can help, you can be there, and you can say, and you can also explain, like, so if you fall to the temptation, it's not the falling to the temptation that gets you excommunicated. It's not repenting when you do fall to the temptation. So if you fall to the temptation, we are the people you flee to, right? Not from, right? Your church, your people, that's who you flee to when you fall to the temptation. And she knew that because she had seen people confess who were under discipline and be embraced, right? So the growing up in that situation where it was a benefit to her soul and to the generations that will come after that aren't going to have to deal with a mom that has baggage that those actions would have come from, right? So I mean, the process of our Christian faith is the unpacking the baggage that the generations packed before us, and then that we helped pack. We unpack and confess and learn to deal with the fear and the guilt and the shame of it all throughout our lives, right? We continue to unpack, and then we do some repacking, and then we unpack again, right? But having a church that you've seen grace enacted right in front of you, right? This person committed this crime against the law of God. They confess it to Jesus. They confess it to the people to their people, and the people all rush towards them, surround them, pray for them, and then support them as they deal with the consequences of it. Right? She'd seen all that, and so she knew that's
so huge.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. That's what. But we are asking the federal government all the way at the top to do that when we won't in our churches, right?
If we did, we would never actually have them.
Said the church that's not obeying Jesus.
Well, and just to take it a step further, like in our own homes, as you were talking, I was thinking like, one of the things that I try and work with my kids is like, don't hide sin.
Yeah.
Like, bring it to daddy. Like, daddy wants to help you with this. Right. So if you have sin, bring it to me. We know where to put it at. We have a savior. He takes our sin, so we don't have to hide it. Because when you hide your sin, and I always want to teach them this, someone else will find it, and someone else will use it against you, and you will be enslaved to that person when Jesus wants to free you from it. So don't hide your sins. Like, bring it to me. We'll confess it if we have, and then God deals with it, and we ask Him to forgive us. Yeah.
Well, I think that we tend to think that that when somebody confesses sin, that the way to keep them from sinning again next time is to hold it over them,
Right.
like yeah,
Yeah.
or lecture them or something, right?
Yeah.
Rather than doing what God does when we confess sin. We confess our sins, and He says, "I forgive you," and then He forgets it, right? I forgive you, amongst other things, is a promise to not treat you according to it, right? So He forgets our sins, and that forgiveness softens hearts,
Yeah.
and but we forgive, and then we say we forgive, and then we don't forget, or we say, now let me tell you how bad what you did was. Now that you're forgiven, I should make sure you feel lots of shame, right? But shame, man, that creates a rhino hide on the hearts of our kids. That is not what we want. You lift shame. You just point them to Jesus. He was publicly naked on the cross, bearing all this shame, right? So that you don't have to, right? So that shame's all gone. And it's it's counterintuitive. We think we need to apply shame and manipulative pressure and things, when actually forgiveness is the thing that shifts the imagination of our kids towards confession in the future, right? So if they know, confess this, I'm going to have to go through it, right? I'm going to have to suck it up and deal with it. That shifts their imagination away from confession.
Yep.
It shifts their imagination towards hiding. And we want, we had a funny conversation with one of our kids just recently where they came to us with something that had happened, and we were talking through with it. And they said, man, it is so awkward. Sometimes I wish I didn't have such a good relationship with my parents. That's what they said to us, because they were saying, like, oh, it's awkward to work through some of the things that but it wasn't. They were sort of being facetious, but also just some of the conversations you have to have with teenagers are really awkward. And as parents, you're like, I don't want to have the awkward conversation any more than you do, but I want you to have the wisdom that I have gained through my failure experience and observations and study. And, I want you to have that wisdom. And so that you have to have those conversations. But it was so funny that comment, the sly, backhanded compliment.
I've seen in, I don't want to start a whole nother thing, but I've seen, in raising my oldest, who's a teenager now, I've seen the relationship adjust to, there's moments where the office is the same, but my conversation is like a little sister. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I haven't changed being her father, but I've learned that this is my sister in the Lord too. And so the way that I'm talking to her and developing her and the conversations we're having, there's at least in the modern time, there's certain conversations dads don't want to have, but there's conversations where brothers have with their sisters because they love them, but I'm seeing how when this double dutch happens, the office hasn't changed, the authority hasn't changed, but the way it's communicated is with the love of a godly brother who loves his sister and wants her to grow up in godliness, and that's been lovely.
The way Aaron and I have talked about it is your kids start directly behind you. We're walking this way, they're directly behind you. And then as they hit that kind of tweener years, they step out to the side. They're still behind you. They're still following, but they step out to the side and they can see not just the back of your head. You want them to be able to see forward. Right. So you're still pointing things out as you go. Right. But then teenagers, they sort of step up next to you. You walk with them. Right. You're side by side, shoulder to shoulder. And that's the goal, right? Is you're still pointing things out. You're still, you still have authority, but you're in an advisory role, right? Because they're shifting to when they grow up and you no longer have authority over them, and you want them to come to you as an advisor. But it's you're now right. You go from an authoritative advisor to a a voluntary advisor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Right.
But that's how it's going anyway. But we want to keep them directly behind us all the time and then just suddenly launch them, right? Instead of hopefully moving them into that, you're moving into that advisory role in their lives, and they're going to make mistakes as teenagers. They're going to still sin, but the relationship that you have with them should be pointed at the next phase in each phase, right? We're historical creatures raising historical creatures. We're maturing creatures raising maturing creatures. So you always want to be pointed at that next phase in each phase. And then, you launch them and hopefully they go much further than you. And, but you get to stay in that advisory role and that enjoyment role. And a huge, I tell young parents this all the time when they're like, man, are the teenage years hard? You say, well, if you enjoy them when they're little, you'll enjoy them when they're teenagers.
Yeah.
Because it's the same. It's a you thing.
Yeah, that's right.
When you as teenagers, what you discover every time is, I didn't enjoy them very much before either, but I could control them then.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Hey, next time, since however we got launched into the Enlightenment, can we talk about the medieval mind next time?
Yeah.
I'm feeling like
that'd be great.
The more that you send me stuff and I'm reading kind of some C.S. Lewis stuff, he was infatuated with the medieval mind. And I think it's because he understood how far off we were from it in the Enlightenment. Like we were children of the Enlightenment.
Right.
And I think he knew like we had a broken cosmology, which is another thing why, growing up Christian and living in evangelicalism, we keep thinking what we need is a lot more theology, systematic theology. And it's like we do. But we don't understand that our theology is rooted in an Enlightenment cosmology.
Right.
So then what we're getting is fragments, broken fragments that we're trying to piece things together, where Lewis was like, what you need is a realignment of the world that you live in, which is why he wrote the kind of books he did, which makes more sense to me now. Because I was like, before, why would I read C.S. Lewis? Nobody needs to read C.S. Lewis. Nobody needs to read all this fiction, the Christian fiction. Get rid of the fiction. We live in the real world, people. Like that was, and I think a lot of evangelicals are like, oh, they love Christian fiction, but then it doesn't mess with their cosmology either, right? But C.S. Lewis is writing to try and tell you the world that you're embracing or loving, from what I'm seeing, and this is somebody who is very infantile in Lewis, okay? This is not a far-fetched world. This is the world you live in. This is the world, And so, and I think it was him trying to bring in the medieval mind into, which understood that, and bring us into a reality of the cosmos. So
he was looking around and saying, all of you people live in an imaginative universe. None of you are living in reality. And it was the realists, that he said are the most, that have most embraced an imaginative universe, that are refusing to live in reality. Now he's got a funny quote of Tolkien. Tolkien was instrumental in leading him to the Lord. He said at one point he was talking to Tolkien, and Tolkien said, man, Lewis said, I'm getting a lot of pushback that we write escapist fantasy. And he said, who's concerned about escape? The jailer.
Dang.
It's like all the he said all the realists didn't want escapist literature because they were that they were the slave that would turn you into master when you tried to escape. They were the fellow prisoner that would say, hey, he's digging a hole out the back of his.
The ones who
You know,
tell on you that you
gotta
pop your
take that spoon
fireworks.
away. He's digging a hole out of the prison. Yeah.
Those same
They said
guys.
that, and that all the realists were like that.
All right. So what do I need
which
to what do I need
think
to
it's
read
hilarious.
to prep for next week then?
I mean, a new book just came out this year called The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis.